My name is Robert, a 38-year-old businessman in New York City. I built my company from scratch, sacrificing nights, weekends, even my health, believing that success would give my family everything we ever needed. At home, I had Mary, my wife, graceful and admired, the woman I thought was my anchor. Together, we looked flawless. Wealth, reputation, the perfect marriage everyone envied. But perfection is a fragile mask. While I worked late at the office, Mary often whispered excuses about overtime or urgent trips with her boss, David, a powerful executive from Chicago. I silenced my doubts, convincing myself she was faithful, until one night the mask shattered. The truth cut deeper than any blade. Mary wasn't just unfaithful. She was unfaithful with David, my wife, and her boss. I didn't scream. I didn't confront. I chose silence. Because silence, I knew, would be the sharpest weapon of all. Before we begin, I would really appreciate it if you like this video, you can help me continue to spread the meaningful lesson. If you haven't subscribed yet, I recommend you subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss any videos. If you like this video, please comment 1. If you don't like it, please comment 0 to let me know so I can make a better video for you. Now, let's get started. In the beginning, nothing seemed unusual. Mary still smiled at me in the mornings, kissed me on the cheek before I left for work, and even sent me the occasional text telling me not to skip lunch. To anyone looking in, our marriage seemed intact, untouched by the storms that destroy so many others. But small details have a way of whispering louder than grand gestures. It started with her schedule. Mary had always been diligent, but suddenly her work became demanding in ways I'd never seen before. "David needs me on this project," she would say, her voice firm, her eyes darting away as if searching for a reason not to meet mine. David, her boss in Chicago. I had met him once during a company dinner. He was polished, confident, with the kind of commanding presence that filled a room. I didn't think much of it at the time. Men like him existed everywhere in business. Men who thrived on attention, who used charm like a weapon. The first time she mentioned a late-night meeting, I brushed it off. Everyone in corporate life knows deadlines come with sacrifice. But when late nights became routine, when business trips stretched longer than they should, a faint shadow began to creep into my mind. Still, I swallowed my unease. After all, hadn't I done the same? Nights buried in financial reports, weekends lost to investor calls. Mary had stood by me through all of that. I owed her trust. Yet trust is a fragile thing when silence grows too wide. I noticed her phone, once left carelessly on the counter, now clutched tightly, screen flipped down whenever I walked into the room. Calls ended abruptly when I entered, and her laughter, once shared freely with me, was now muffled behind closed doors. One evening, she came home from a strategy session in Chicago. I remember the scent of cologne clinging faintly to her blouse, a fragrance I didn't recognize. It wasn't mine. I asked about it, half joking, but she brushed me off with a quick laugh. "Probably just someone from the office," she said. Her explanation was neat, too neat, and the way her hands trembled slightly when she poured herself a glass of wine told me more than her words ever could. I wanted to confront her right then, demand the truth, but I held back. Entrepreneurs know timing is everything. Ask a question too early, and you lose the leverage. Strike too late, and you miss the opportunity. So, I waited, even as the cracks deepened. Our dinners became quieter. She scrolled through her phone while I talked about expansion plans in Los Angeles. Her responses were short, automatic. "That's nice. Sounds good." The warmth in her eyes had been replaced by something distant, like her body was present, but her mind was elsewhere. I told myself she was tired, overwhelmed, that maybe I was projecting my own exhaustion onto her. But deep down, I felt it. The shift, the drift, the unraveling of what we had built together. It's strange how betrayal doesn't always roar into your life. Sometimes it seeps in quietly, like water through a crack in the foundation. Invisible at first, unstoppable once it spreads. I began noticing things I couldn't ignore. The new lingerie tucked at the back of her drawer, tags still attached, style she had never worn for me. Credit card charges for luxury hotels in Chicago filed under conferences. A pair of earrings that appeared overnight, ones I had never bought her. Every clue pressed against my chest like a weight, but I said nothing. My silence wasn't weakness. It was a strategy. In business, you don't reveal your position until you're certain of the outcome. And this was no different. I realized then that my marriage, much like a startup partnership gone sour, was heading toward collapse. The foundation of trust was crumbling, and all that remained was the question of how I would respond. Would I lash out, let anger dictate my moves? Or would I, as I had done in boardrooms across the country, study the game, gather the evidence, and strike only when the timing promised maximum impact? For now, I chose patience. I let her think I was blind. I let her believe her secrets were safe. Because while Mary and David were weaving their lies, I was already beginning to sketch the outlines of a plan that would change everything. The day the truth revealed itself was not with fireworks or dramatic confession. It came in the form of quiet confirmation, the kind that leaves no room for denial. It was a Thursday evening in Chicago. I had flown in unannounced to meet with a potential investor who had shown sudden interest in my company's expansion plans. Normally, I would have told Mary, but something inside me resisted. Call it instinct. Call it the gut feeling every entrepreneur learns to trust when the numbers don't add up. When my flight landed, I called Mary. No answer. I texted. Silence. I told myself she was busy. But then, walking out of the airport, I saw her name flash across my phone. In a meeting, can I call later? The text was too polished, too calculated. Mary never texted like that with me. That was corporate Mary, the mask she wore in the office. Not the woman who used to send me messy, half-finished sentences with too many emojis. I decided not to reply. Instead, I let the silence stretch. I checked into a downtown hotel and sat there, staring at the city lights flickering across the Chicago skyline, my mind running faster than any boardroom pitch I had ever given. If she was truly in a meeting, why did her tone feel rehearsed? Why had my gut been screaming louder with each passing day? That night, I couldn't sleep. At 11:45 p.m., driven by a mix of dread and determination, I left the hotel. I knew the address of David's corporate apartment. He had mentioned it casually at that company dinner months ago, boasting about his second home near the river. Back then, I didn't care. Now it felt like the coordinates of betrayal. I parked across the street, the winter air biting against my skin. The building glowed with sterile white light, sleek and modern, the kind of place executives buy to escape their families. For nearly an hour, I sat in my car, questioning myself. Was I paranoid? Was I about to ruin my marriage over suspicion? But then, at 1 a.m., the answer walked out the door. Mary, my wife. Her hair was undone, her coat clutched tightly, stepping into the cold night with David right behind her. His hand brushed the small of her back, intimate, possessive. She leaned into it, not resisting, not pulling away. The way her face softened when she looked at him was all the proof I needed. There are moments in life that slice you open so cleanly, you don't bleed right away. You just stand there, stunned, waiting for the pain to catch up. This was mine. I didn't storm out of the car, didn't scream her name. Instead, I lowered my head against the steering wheel, letting the reality burn itself into me. The woman I had trusted with everything, my partner, my anchor, was now tangled in the arms of another man, and not just any man, but her boss. The humiliation was a storm that threatened to drown me. I thought of the investors who respected me, the employees who saw me as a leader, the friends who called Mary and me the perfect couple. What would they say if they knew the truth? That while I was pitching deals in New York and Los Angeles, Mary was building a different kind of partnership here in Chicago. But beneath the shame, something else stirred. A clarity, a steel edge cutting through the fog of despair. I realized that night that anger would do nothing for me. Confrontation in the street would only give them a scandal to twist. But silence was power. I drove back to my hotel without being seen. My hands shook on the wheel, not from weakness, but from restraint. Entrepreneurs know the value of leverage. of waiting for the perfect moment to reveal the cards you've been holding. That night, I started thinking not as a broken husband, but as a strategist. The next morning, I called a private investigator in Los Angeles, someone I'd used once before in a corporate dispute. Discretion was his specialty. "I need everything," I told him. "Photos, texts, receipts. Don't leave gaps." My voice didn't tremble. It was calm, cold. Because now, I wasn't chasing suspicion. I was documenting facts. As I hung up, I stared at my reflection in the hotel mirror. My eyes looked hollow, but behind them was fire. Mary thought she was in control, hiding behind boardroom excuses and whispered lies. David thought his power protected him. They were wrong. They had no idea that the man they underestimated wasn't broken. He was calculating. And soon, the affair they thought was a secret would become the very weapon I'd use to dismantle them both. The night I watched Mary walk out of David's apartment, hand lingering in his, something inside me hardened. Pain had burned through me, yes, but what remained was clarity. If part 2 of my life had been about betrayal, part 3 would be about calculation. I returned to New York the next morning, carrying a truth no one else knew. At the office, I slipped back into my routine with practiced ease. My employees saw the same Robert, decisive in meetings, sharp with numbers, relentless in negotiations. But behind that mask, I was already building something different. Not a company this time, but a strategy. Entrepreneurs learn early that preparation happens in silence. Deals collapse when secrets spill too soon. My marriage was no different. I understood that if I wanted to walk away intact, not just emotionally, but financially and socially, I needed to play the long game. The first step was evidence. Suspicion means nothing in court. Emotions are worthless currency in front of a judge. I needed receipts, documents, photos, timestamps, assets of truth. The private investigator I'd hired in Los Angeles worked quickly. Within 2 weeks, he sent me a file thick enough to crush whatever defense Mary and David thought they had. Photos of late-night dinners that ended in hotel suites. Credit card statements showing charges at 5-star restaurants in Chicago. Even security footage from David's building shows Mary entering with him and leaving hours later. When I opened the file, I didn't cry. I didn't throw it across the room. I studied it the way I study a quarterly report. Cold, detached, looking for patterns, weaknesses, leverage. Each page was another nail in the coffin of their secret. Next came the lawyers. Not the kind you find in glossy ads, but seasoned divorce attorneys who'd built careers dismantling complex financial entanglements. I scheduled discreet consultations in Los Angeles and San Francisco, away from the eyes of anyone who might gossip back in New York. I walked into those offices not as a victim, but as a client prepared to fight for control. Your advantage, one attorney told me, is silence. Don't confront her. Don't let her suspect what you know. The element of surprise is worth more than any piece of evidence. I nodded. I already understood. Silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. At home, Mary continued her performance. She still cooked dinner twice a week, still asked about my projects, still kissed me goodnight. But I saw the nervous flicker in her eyes when her phone buzzed at odd hours. I noticed the way she avoided planning trips with me too far ahead, as if she couldn't guarantee she'd be available. To her, I was the oblivious husband. To me, she was already a liability I was preparing to sever. Financially, I moved just as carefully. Quietly, I shifted assets into trusts, restructured parts of the company so that ownership looked untouchable in the event of a messy divorce. I made sure retirement accounts were protected, real estate holdings separated, and liquid assets shielded. I treated it like a hostile takeover. Anticipate the enemy's moves, close every loophole before they find it. At night, I'd sit in my study with the city lights pouring through the window, reviewing the documents spread across my desk. Bank statements, legal notes, contracts, all pieces of a puzzle only I could see. While Mary thought she was pulling strings in secret, I was weaving a net around her, thread by thread. There were moments when the weight of it all nearly broke me. Times I wanted to throw everything on the table and scream at her, demand to know why she'd done it. But I reminded myself of what anger costs. In business, emotional decisions kill deals. In marriage, they ruin strategy. My silence was not cowardice, it was discipline. I began recording conversations subtly, storing emails, and cataloging every unexplained trip. My phone became a vault. My safe became an arsenal. And through it all, Mary kept smiling, believing she had fooled me. She didn't see the shift in my eyes, the way I no longer reached for her hand when we walked side by side. She thought she held the upper hand, that her secret was safe. But what she didn't know was that every move she made was being logged, tracked, and preserved. That the husband she thought was blind was quietly transforming into her executioner. By the end of that month, my plan was no longer a draft. It was a weapon sharpened and ready. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to strike. The morning of the hearing arrived like the opening bell of a market war. I woke up early, dressed with the same precision I wore to investor meetings: dark suit, clean tie, polished shoes. To most, it was just a divorce proceeding. To me, it was a boardroom battlefield, the day my silent preparation would turn into strategy and strategy into execution. Mary walked into the Manhattan courthouse looking radiant, as if she were the one in control. She wore a tailored dress, pearls around her neck, her chin tilted high with the confidence of someone who thought the law favored her. At her side was David, his presence as arrogant as ever. He wasn't a party to the case, but he came anyway, smug, as if his influence could bend the walls of justice. They whispered and laughed softly while their attorney, a sharp-looking woman with an air of intimidation, stacked folders on the table. I studied them the way I study competitors at the negotiating table, calm, detached, taking notes with my eyes. My own attorney, a veteran from San Francisco who had dismantled bigger fortunes than mine, leaned toward me and said quietly, "Just keep your composure. Timing is everything." Timing. The same principle that had built my company would now dismantle their illusions. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. Papers rustled. The session began with the usual pleasantries: dates of marriage, years together, assets in dispute. Mary's lawyer spoke with eloquence, painting her as the loyal wife who had supported me through my rise, who deserved half of everything I had built. She spoke of sacrifice, of partnership, of fairness. And for a moment, if you didn't know the truth, you might believe her. But truth has a way of waiting patiently, ready to strike when the stage is set. My lawyer stood, calm and deliberate. "Your Honor," he began, "while opposing counsel argues for fairness, there are facts, undeniable facts, that must be considered before this court can determine what fairness truly means." He placed a thick folder on the table and slid forward. Inside were the months of evidence I had gathered in silence: photographs, credit card receipts, timestamps, witness statements. One by one, he laid them out like cards in a game of poker where the other side had bet everything on a bluff. The first photo appeared on the screen: Mary and David, hand in hand, leaving his Chicago apartment at 1 in the morning. Gasps filled the courtroom. Mary's face drained of color. David shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight. Then came the receipts: hotel stays charged to David's corporate card, dinners at restaurants far beyond what any business trip required. Emails surfaced, playful, intimate, the kind you can't mistake for professional. Each page stripped away another layer of their defense until nothing remained but silence. Mary's attorney tried to object, but the judge raised a hand. "Sit down, counselor. The evidence is admissible." I sat there, expression steady, the way I sit through earnings reports when the numbers are devastating for competitors. Inside, I felt no need to gloat. The destruction unfolding before me wasn't about vengeance in noise. It was about precision in silence. David looked furious, whispering sharply to Mary, his confidence evaporating with each new revelation. For a man used to controlling boardrooms, he looked small in that courtroom chair. And Mary, my once perfect partner, looked like a trapped executive who had bet everything on a risky merger that collapsed in public view. When the evidence presentation ended, the judge leaned back, eyes heavy with disappointment. Given the overwhelming proof of infidelity, he said, The court cannot in good conscience award spousal support to Mrs. Taylor. Furthermore, the integrity of her claims is compromised. Mary's face froze. She had come expecting a windfall, believing she would walk away with half of everything I had built. Instead, she walked into a trap of her own making. My attorney leaned back, satisfied. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I simply folded my hands on the table, calm as a man who had known this outcome all along. In business, you learn that victory isn't about shouting louder or pushing harder. It's about letting the other side hang themselves with their own rope while you stand quietly, holding the proof. That day in court, I wasn't the betrayed husband anymore. I was the strategist, the closer, the one who walked away while the opposition crumbled. As we left the courtroom, I caught a glimpse of David, his face pale, his reputation already leaking through the cracks. For Mary, the silence between us was louder than any argument could ever be. She had lost, not just me, but everything she thought she could take from me. And I walked out into the New York sunlight, not broken, not bitter, but free. The strategy had worked. The execution was flawless. And the war was mine. When the gavel struck and the judge's ruling echoed through the courtroom, it felt less like an ending and more like the opening bell of another chapter. The legal battle was over, but the consequences ripple outward long after the verdict is read. Mary walked out of the courthouse with David trailing beside her. Her pearls no longer looked elegant. They looked like armor that had cracked. The cameras outside caught her face, pale and tight, as reporters shouted questions she couldn't answer. Mrs. Taylor, what do you say about the affair? Did you misuse corporate funds? How long has this been going on? Each question was a blade, and she had no shield left. By the next morning, headlines had already spread online. Blogs, business journals, even gossip sites ran the story. Top executive implicated in affair, divorce scandal. David's company moved quickly, stating that he had been placed on leave pending internal investigation. Within a week, the board forced his resignation. His spotless corporate image, once polished, untouchable, was stained beyond repair. Mary fared no better. The social circles she once navigated with ease began to close their doors. Invitations dried up. Friends, she thought, loyal, avoided her calls. Even her family, embarrassed by the exposure, stepped back. What she had gambled for, status, security, admiration, crumbled in her hands like ash. As for me, I stayed silent. I didn't feed the press, didn't answer questions, didn't post on social media. My silence was louder than any statement. People filled in the blanks themselves, and in doing so, they painted me as the man wronged yet dignified, the husband who had endured betrayal but handled it with composure. In business, perception often matters more than truth, and this perception worked in my favor. Inside, I felt no triumphal roar, no childish glee. What I felt was something colder, steadier, vindication. They had underestimated me, believed I was too consumed with work to notice, too trusting to act. They mistook my silence for blindness. But silence had been my weapon, and patience my ally. The fallout hit them hardest where they thought they were strongest. For David, it was his career. He lost not just a job, but the empire of influence he had built on his reputation. For Mary, it was the life she thought she could control, the financial security, the social standing, the comfort of being tied to me. In one court ruling, all of it vanished. Sometimes I wondered if she lay awake at night, realizing that every smile she faked, every lie she told, had been quietly documented, preserved, and ultimately used against her. Betrayal doesn't just end love. It destroys trust, and with it, the future that could have been. My own life didn't suddenly turn into a fairy tale. There were nights when the loneliness crept in, when I stared at the empty side of the bed and felt the echo of what once was. But alongside that ache was something stronger, freedom. Freedom to build again, to focus on my company without the poison of deceit festering at home. Entrepreneurs know that every collapse carries within it the seed of reinvention. What had fallen apart in my marriage became the foundation for something new. I had protected my assets, shielded my company, and reclaimed my dignity. I had walked through betrayal and come out not broken, but sharper, For Mary and David, the downfall was complete. They had bet everything on secrecy and lost it all in the light of truth. For me, the lesson was clear. In business, as in life, betrayal may wound you, but strategy, silent, patient, ruthless, can turn that wound into the sharpest blade. And so, while they lived in the ruins of their choices, I walked forward into the future, carrying not bitterness, but resolve. The war was never about noise. It was about control, and in the end, control was mine. Looking back, I realized the real battle was never just about Mary or David. It wasn't even about infidelity. It was about control, about whether I would let betrayal define me, or whether I would take that betrayal and use it as fuel to write my own ending. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't fight in the street. I didn't waste my time trying to convince them of my worth. Instead, I stayed silent. I prepared, and when the moment came, I let the truth speak louder than anger ever could. That silence, patient, deliberate, was my sharpest weapon. What happened in that courtroom destroyed them, but it freed me. It reminded me that in life, as in business, strategy always outlasts impulse. Betrayal may cut deep, but with discipline and patience, you can turn pain into power, humiliation into dignity, and loss into freedom. The world saw Mary and David's downfall as a scandal. I saw it as justice, and I walked away not broken, but stronger, carrying with me the kind of clarity you only earn when you've stood face to face with treachery and refused to bow to it. Now I turn to you. What lesson do you take from this story? If you were in my place, betrayed, humiliated, yet armed with truth, what would you have done? Would you lash out in anger, or would you choose silence and strategy? I want to hear from you. Comment below with one lesson you've learned from this story and how you would apply it in your own life. And if this story resonated with you, if you found strength or clarity in it, don't forget to support this channel. If you like this video, please leave a comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.